Hello and thanks for joining us. Justin Trudeau wins a second term, taking 157 seats, 13 shy of the 170 seats required for a majority parliament. But without a clear mandate, the Liberals will need a lot of help from other political parties to govern. Earlier today, I spoke with Brian Depratto. He's senior economist at TD Bank Group about the fallout from this week's election. He says a lot of unanswered questions remain.
I hate to say it, but we don't know for sure yet, obviously, with the minority point of view. But if you start with the Liberal platform, modestly growth positive, some adjustments around the edges, but ultimately this doesn't really do a whole lot to change, our view on growth, our long-term view on growth, our view on the Bank of Canada. I think really it's going to be business as usual.
You had some interesting notes in your report that came out on the election, talking about the fact that this is a spending government. They do plan on spending, but given where we are in the cycle, you're not going to see the impact of that spending so much. So is that why it's kind of business as usual? That's
exactly it. When you have a situation like we're in, unemployment very, very low, what we call the output gap, that's economist talk for basically how much slack in the economy there is. Not really a whole lot out there. Bank of Canada, similar assessment. So you get less bang for your buck. The time, I would say in general for government spending we get the most is in a recession, as you might believe. And when you're coming out, a little less so. And for that reason, we're getting these relatively decent-sized spending promises. We don't really expect to see very much on the growth side.
Let's bring up a diagram that you put out as part of your report. It's a lovely Venn diagram, very colorful.
Thank you.
You talk about, obviously, the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, and what you're showing here is just where the overlap is on policies in terms of the things they agree with at probably a high level. So let's run through some of those, because I think it's interesting in terms of what we might be able to expect at this point. And I will give you a safety of knowing we don't know what we don't know until it all actually happens. In the overlap between, I'll say, the Liberals and the Conservatives, what we're seeing is both in favor of personal tax cuts and both in favor of the TMX pipeline. Tell me what your thoughts, what we could see happen there.
Absolutely. On the first part, on the tax thing, we already saw Prime Minister Trudeau this morning talking about that as his first item on the legislative agenda. This is something the Conservatives had a similar, from a really high-level point of view, but slightly different proposal. Same basic idea, though. The Liberal proposal is you take that basic personal allowance, that's how much you can earn before you start paying tax, move that up to about $15,000 by 2023. That's about $2,000 higher than it would have been. That puts a little bit more money back in a family's pocketbooks. A little bit similar in magnitude to what the Conservatives had proposed in terms of that first bracket change. The difference there being that the Liberals, they're going to kind of roll that back, claw that back. So by the time you get to about $210,000 in income, you won't see any of that benefit there. A little bit of a difference there, but overall I would say kind of similar, some areas of agreement there. The other big question, of course, Trans Mountain. As it stands today, we again saw Prime Minister Trudeau reaffirming a commitment to this. I think it's important to remember that absent any major legal upsets, there's no reason for that to come back to a vote, to come back to the legislative agenda. Construction's underway, so I think cautious optimism is warranted there. And certainly this is an area where you see clear alignment with the Conservative Party priorities.
And also trying to, of course, help parts of the country that had absolutely no Liberal representation with the outcome of the election at the same time.
Absolutely.
Let's talk a bit about the center of this Venn diagram, where it looks like everybody agrees on, which is rare, because I don't think we've had a lot of agreement. But this is measures to try and support housing demand.
That's right. All parties had a little bit of a different take on this. But as fractious as it was, everyone can agree that we need higher housing prices, apparently. The Liberals were talking about increasing and expanding their first-time homebuyer incentive. That's that sort of equity mortgage kind of approach. We've seen things from the NDP in terms of building more houses, the Conservatives on amortizations, changing rules around the B20 stress test, mortgage renewal rules, things like that. All these things point in the same direction. They help to drive near-term affordability, kind of expanding that budget, and again, just supporting demand for housing, a clear area where everyone seems to be in alignment.
Let's move to the next part of the diagram, where you've got the Liberals and the NDP overlapping. And what we see, a bunch of things here: pharmacare, foreign buyers tax, and the housing ownership registry. Let's go in reverse order. Let's start with the housing ownership registry. I sound like a Canadian there when I said hoser, but anyway.
This one's a little bit, I guess, nebulous in terms of trying to assess the impact. The basic idea here is that you make a public record of who owns what. In effect, the idea is you take a spotlight and shine that in. So to the extent that you have any questionable money in the system there, people trying to hide assets offshore from other jurisdictions. The idea here is you kind of, light sterilizes that kind of thing. We saw both parties talking about that. This will involve the provinces most likely. The other aspect there, the foreign buyers tax, we're hearing from at least the Liberal point of view, sort of modeled on the BC approach. The idea there being that if you're a non-resident, you've got a house here, you're not living here or renting that house, you're going to pay 1% of the value of that house each year in a tax. Again, the idea there being, releasing that supply, bringing a little bit more onto market there, and of course, taking a little bit of that speculative element out of the market. And then pharmacare, again, is a little bit of a question mark here. We saw the Liberal platform as it stood. They hadn't actually included this in their costing. So when you look at the actual deficit figures, that's not in there. They allocated about $6 billion to look into this, try to move things forward. They, of course, commissioned a report last year. I think their approach was, cautious, moving forward, but in a measured pace. The NDP, this was one of their pillars of their platform. They want to have something in place by as early as next year. We're talking of significant dollar figures here, about $11 billion per the Parliamentary Budget Officer costing of that promise. So I think there's some alignment there. It remains to be seen just what that timeline and what the scale of that really will be.
I've only got about 30 seconds, but we didn't see a huge currency reaction on this election, I think, because it was pretty much, I would say, historically in line with what people were expecting. Do you expect to see perhaps more market reaction on an issue-by-issue basis?
I think that's really where it's going to be. I think there's obviously still some lingering concerns around, say, the energy sector. Some more certainty there would be helpful. But again, I think the big one to watch would be the major votes. So for the near term, that's going to be the budget, how that plays out. But ultimately, it's not our first time with the rodeo, not our first minority government. Any effect, I think, would be pretty short-lived.
Brian, thank you.
Thank you.